of dealing with stubborn rust, broken bolts, and a lot of skinned knuckles, this is the moment I've been chasing. A brand new heart for the Dart, built from this uncertain junkyard find. But getting to this point, that's the real story. It all started with a cool February stroll through my local junkyard, just to see what I could find. And that's when I saw it. The donor for the Dart's new power plant. At the heart of this 1998 Dodge Ram was a 5.9 liter Magnum with only 150,000 miles on it. I knew right then this was the one. So we loaded it up, hauled it home, and that's when the real work began. A quick walk around showed me that it was rusty, grimy, and had more than a few leaks. But overall, seemed to be in pretty decent shape on the outside. I was just hoping the inside wasn't trashed. Teardown started off pretty smoothly, but then I had to go and open my mouth. So far, these are coming out pretty easy. I shouldn't have said that. And as I got to removing the intake, nope, try again, jackass. And I did, with a pry bar and a hammer. I win. My first peek into the valley was pretty promising, but the real proof would be under the valve covers. And with the condition in the valley leaving me pretty optimistic, ooh, I wasn't disappointed. That's clean. I was worried about sludge, and even the oil that's in here is not like super black. Hell, that is well taken care of. Freaking score! With the top end looking good, it's time to start getting these heads off. Getting off the first exhaust manifold left a couple of studs in the head, but yeah, we'll get to that later. After getting the valve train removed and organized, it was time for head bolts. This is where I learned my first lesson, which some of you pointed out to me, fat kid needs a breaker bar. And after a ride on the struggle bus that was a little bit longer than I would have liked, I found another pleasant surprise. A little dirt and carbon aside, the inside of these cylinder heads looked fantastic. There was even still cross-hatching on the wall. So I filled them with a little Marvel Mystery Oil, let them sit overnight, and then tried to clean them up. They came out pretty okay. And with the driver's side down, time to tackle the passenger side. And in the beginning, the corrosion got the best of me until it didn't. I stepped up my game. I made use of my opposable thumbs and ended up victorious. Sort of. There were still studs in the head. I tried a few things to get them out. Heat, lube, vice grips, more heat, more lube, more grip. I got a couple out, but in the end, I just said screw it, moved on to pulling the head, and having not learned my lesson, I grunted my way through 10 more head bolts. And this is when I made a few eyes twitch, like finishing with the impact gun. I still don't see why using an impact gun to finish bolts that are already loose is a big deal, but I damn sure don't know everything, so feel free to educate me down in the comments. I ain't scared. Now with the second head off and a quick check to see that the cylinders looked good, I started working towards removing the camshaft. This started with getting the lifters out, and a couple of them didn't want to come out the top, so I had to wait until later so I could drop them out the bottom side. The front end parts came off with little to no struggle. Crank pulley, balancer, water pump, and the timing cover. The timing chain was floppy as a... okay, we won't talk about that. But it was time for a new one. And after pulling the cam retention plate, it was time to ease that baby out. I wanted to reuse this camshaft, so I couldn't mess it up. And with the top end disassembly complete, it was time to roll her over and get into the bottom. Yummy. And like the top end did, the bottom end looked pretty fantastic. I even found evidence of a prior rebuild, which explains a lot. And after stamping the rod caps, I went ahead and dropped the pistons. Now this is one spot where you guys have enlightened me. I never would have thought that using the little chunks of fuel hose to cover the threads could cause problems, but if a piece breaks off, gets into the oil passages, and I don't get that out, that could cause a major malfunction later on down the road. Thank you very much, Mr. Dennis Owen, for teaching me that little lesson. Better to learn that from the comments than from a spun bearing. And speaking of bearings, These rod bearings were showing signs of wear, so definitely time to replace them. After finishing dropping all the pistons, the crank actually ran really smooth, and my rod journals were in pretty good shape too. Next was the main caps. They came out with a little bit of struggle. Again, breaker bar here would have been nice. And most of my main bearings actually looked really good, except for the thrust bearing. Yeah, we're just gonna replace them all. And to round out this engine teardown, out comes the crank. Oh hey, remember those lifters that wouldn't come out the top? It's time to get those guys out. And with our teardown now complete, we're on to my least favorite part of engine building, cleaning everything. Boo! Now before I went too far down the cleaning hole, I really needed to know if this block had to go to the machine shop or not. Because if so, they can clean it. To figure that out, I needed to check the cylinder bores and the crank journals for wear. These measurements let me know whether my cylinders needed to be bored over or my journals shaved down. It also let me know if I need new pistons and what size bearings and rings that I needed to order. Fortunately, all my measurements were well within tolerance, but that meant I had to clean it myself. So I embraced the suck and I grabbed my trusty super scraper. This thing does a fantastic job of getting rid of the old gasket material, but it can always be better. And much to some of your dismay, out comes the angle grinder. Don't worry, we're just using a paint stripping pad. And this works really well. Those gasket surfaces, they look sharp. And just to verify that I didn't ruin it, I checked the deck for flatness. Yep, still flat. So I finished cleaning off all the rest of the gasket surfaces, checking for flatness as I went. Then it was time to address the outside of the block. The block was pretty crusty. Lots of rust scale, old paint, and I was really curious. How would my super scraper do it getting all this crap off? So we tried it, and the short answer was pretty damn good. It took some time and some elbow grease, but the block came out looking great. Now, after popping out my core plugs, it's time to break out the engine degreaser, let it soak for a bit, and then hit it with the pressure washer. So it looked like a previous owner used like some sort of coolant sealant in here, and it was all over the inside, so I had to work really hard to get that all out. After an initial pass with some compressed air, I finished drying this thing by hand, and then soaked it down in some WD-40 to prevent black rust. And with the block nice and clean, I shifted focus on preparing for reassembly. Armed with a stone hone and some motor oil, I went at refreshing these cylinder walls. And I'll be the first to admit that I definitely could have done a better job at getting that 45-degree angle in the crosshatch, but all in all, I think it looks pretty good. The cam bearings had seen better days, so it was time to get the old ones out, make way for the new. And after driving in the new bearings, it was time to move on to cylinder heads. I had a ton of cleaning to do, so I chose to make the best use of my time by soaking all the small bits of the valve train while I worked on other things. About an hour in some chem dip, it works wonders on these smaller parts. And while those were soaking, remember those exhaust studs we couldn't get out earlier? I went to work on getting those pain in the butts out. So welded a nut to the first stud, started working it back and forth, and sure enough, it snapped off. So I welded up another nut to the stud. This time it held, and we were able to get this first stud out. Yay! 3 more to go. And half a box of nuts later, all 4 of the studs were out. And with that obstacle out of my way, it was time to check on my soaking parts. Now once out of the chem dip, most of these parts just need a quick rinse and a wipe down. But with all the carbon buildup on the valves, those got the royal treatment. Creative use of a drill and some sandpaper made life pretty easy. It was also time to look at some of the bigger parts we soaked. While most of our piston and rod combo came out pretty well, the ring grooves seemed to want to hold on to a lot of that grime. I found a broken compression ring to be a really good scraper for the inside of these grooves, and a little chunk of mechanics wire did a great job at cleaning out the oiling holes. A little elbow grease later, and lo and behold, pretty! Now the heads, those were looking worse than the block did. So after removing the valves with a spring compressor and wrestling out the heat shields for the spark plugs, I took the super scraper to the outside and cleaned up my gasket surfaces. Repeat this stuff on the other side, and the heads are done. For now. I finished cleaning up all my other miscellaneous bits and bobs while I waited for all the new parts to get here. And once they arrived, there was quite a pile. It was time to get this beast back together. So I started with the core plugs, installed the cam, and the top half of the main bearings and the rear main seal. And after a healthy dollop of assembly lube, I dropped in the crankshaft. More lube for the main journals, a fresh set of bearings, and it was time to get these main caps back in place and torqued down to spec. I moved on to get the new rings put onto my pistons, get those installed into the engine, and get our rod caps torqued down to spec. The oil pump and pickup went on without a hitch, but my timing set did give me a bit of trouble. I wasn't entirely sure if my dots were lining up, but I ended up being off by a tooth. I am glad that I was able to catch that before we got this whole thing back together, because tearing it apart to fix it would have sucked. Lifters and heads went in without a problem. Oh yeah, did I mention? Ordered new heads? And we love torquing things, so back to it with some new head bolts. And I thought that using the motor oil bottle to oil my bolts was big brain moves, right up until the point where I dropped the bolt into the bottle. Good job, dumbass. Next came the push rods, more lube, and then I finished the valve train up by bolting on the rocker assemblies. I wanted this Magnum to look like the LA series engine that would have come out of this car. So our Magnum got a shiny new timing cover and LA water pump. And since this is going to have an electric fuel pump, I went ahead and blocked off the port for the mechanical fuel pump. I got the harmonic balancer put on. Then it was time for the oil pan. And this is why you open up all your boxes and check things to make sure they're not jacked up before you start working on your project. Our oil pan was a little banged up, so it was hammer time. While not 100% straight, it hasn't leaked yet. Now, the Magnum usually uses a one-piece oil pan gasket, but since I'm using an LA oil pan, that won't work without either altering the gasket or altering the oil pan. And since gaskets are cheaper to replace, time for surgery by grafting the majority of the Magnum gasket onto a small piece of the original LA pan gasket. We made this thing work. With the oil pan on and torqued down to spec, I learned another very valuable lesson. Put the oil pan on before you build the top end, because flipping a long block over sucks. After that struggle, 2 intake gaskets and 2 fat beads of RTV later, I was ready to drop on this intake. After a measly 12 foot-pounds of torque and 2 crappy valve covers later, I had me an engine. Now, I never shot video of the painting process, but she got 2 coats of primer, 2 coats of Chrysler Industrial Red, and 2 coats of clear. Now, it was back together, and it was very pretty, but would it work? There was only one way to find out. So I built this wooden run stand when I refreshed the 273. So I figured, why not use it to test out the 360 before we drop it in the car? So after topping off the oil, the ATF, and the coolant, I wired the battery up so that I could have my gauges, and then primed the oil system. And just to make sure that the top end was getting oil, went ahead and pulled the valve covers and checked the valves. And me being me, I completely forgot to wire 12 volts to the coil. So I'm trying to start it, nothing's happening. Took me a few minutes to figure out why. Once I corrected that mistake, it was time to give this sucker a shot. What do you know? She kicked right off. And after getting the timing dialed in to 13 degrees before top dead center, she purred like a kid. Man, you gotta love open headers. Now at this point, I had a ton of structural and primer work that needed to be done before I could put the engine back in the car. But eventually, it was time to drop this bad boy in. Once everything was reinstalled and put back together, it was just time for a test drive. If you want to see where we went, check out this video right here.